Laugh, hey there, folks. Welcome to tonight's cozy corner of our podcast. Before we dive into the relaxing story ahead, if you're already feeling like the calming vibes, I'd be over the moon if you could just hit that like button and subscribe. No pressure, though, laugh. Only if you genuinely dig what I'm sharing, and hey, I'd love to feel a little more connected to you all. So drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is where you are. It's like we're having a little chat across the miles. Now, laugh. Let's set the scene for the perfect unwind. Dim those lights, turn on that trusty little fan for some soothing background noise, and maybe get ready to drift away. Tonight, laugh. So we're going to explore the incredible life of Ludwig van Beethoven. Despite battling deafness, this musical genius created some of the most beautiful and powerful compositions the world has ever known. His story is not just about struggle, but also about hope, resilience, and the magic that can happen when you never give up. So yeah, snuggle in, just take a deep breath, and let's let his extraordinary tale lull us into a peaceful state of mind. Imagine Ludwig van Beethoven, the towering figure of classical music, hunched over his piano in a dimly lit Viennese apartment. It's all like the early 1800s, and he's at the peak of his, creative powers. But there's a new, unwelcome guest in his world, a persistent ringing in his ears. At first, he dismisses it as a minor nuisance, perhaps caused by one too many sleepless nights, like scribbling down musical ideas or just indulging in the noisy social scene of Vienna. Beethoven starts to notice little things going wrong. During a rehearsal, he misinterprets the tempo that the musicians are playing. He thinks they read too slow, but in reality, he said the one out of sync. The musicians exchange confused glances, but Beethoven just frowns, convinced they the ones making a mistake. He yells out corrections, his voice booming in the small rehearsal room, but the sound he hears in his head doesn't quite match. What is actually happening? He tries various remedies as any sensible person of the time would. He drinks herbal concoctions recommended by local healers, believing that a simple tonic will always chase away this strange auditory disturbance. He even changes his daily routine, thinking that perhaps too much stress or lack of rest is to blame. But nothing seems to work. The ring persists, and it starts to seep into his dreams. He wakes up in a cold sweat, the sound still echoing in his ears, and just for the first time, a seed of fear is just planted in his mind. As the days turn into weeks, the tinnitus becomes more than just an annoyance. It starts to affect his ability to compose. He struggles to distinguish between the notes he imagines in his head and the faint, distorted sounds he hears just in reality. His once fluid melodies now come out jagged and uncertain. He stares at the blank sheet of music in front of him, his quill hovering above the paper as if waiting for the right notes to magically appear and chase away the ever-present ringing. Little does he know, this is just the beginning of a long, arduous battle against the encroaching silence. Picture the grand premiere of Book Fidelio laugh G. Beethoven's so much anticipated opera. The theater in Vienna is packed. The air is thick with excitement and the rustling of silk gowns and starched collars. Beethoven, standing at the front of the orchestra, is about to conduct the masterpiece he's poured his heart and soul into. But just as the overture begins, something is horribly amiss. Beethoven, lost in his own auditory world, cues the orchestra at the wrong moments. The musicians, so confused but loyal, try their best to follow his increasingly erratic gesture. The tempo speeds up and slows down in a way that makes the music sound more like a chaotic jumble than the harmonious work it's supposed to be. Laugh. The audience starts to sort of murmur and some sort of even let out nervous giggle. As the performance stumbles along, Beethoven remains oblivious to the disaster unfolding around him. He's so focused on the music he hears in his mind that he doesn't realize the disconnect between his gestures and the actual sounds coming from the instruments. Laugh. So when the final notes finally play, there's just like a moment of stunned silence from the audience, and then the polite but hesitant applause begins. It's only when a kind-hearted musician gently taps him on the shoulder and points to the audience that Beethoven realizes what has happened. He turns around, and just as the reality of his failure sinks in, a look of horror just crosses his face. In that moment, the curtain falls on more than just the opera. So it marks the moment when the world realizes that Ludwig van Beethoven, the musical genius, is losing his most precious gift, his hearing. This public humiliation is a bitter pill to swallow. Laugh. But little does he know that it's just the start of a journey that will just test his spirit in ways he could never have imagined. Nestled in the quaint village of Heiligenstadt, away from the bustling chaos of Vienna, Beethoven found himself in a dark abyss of despair. In 1802, at the tender age of 31, he penned what would become known as the Heiligenstadt Testament, a heart-wrenching letter that laid so bare his innermost fears and desperation. So secluded in a small cottage, surrounded by the serene, yet mocking silence of nature, Beethoven sat at a rickety wooden desk. His quill trembled in his hand as he began to write, pouring out his soul onto the parchment. How could I possibly say to others, laugh, oh, speak louder, shout, for I am deaf, really? Oh, he lamented the humiliation of his condition, the fear of being seen as less than the musical god he once was almost too much to bear. He described the torture of his worsening deafness. How the sort of simple pleasures of life, like the chirping of birds, the laughter of friends, the applause of an adoring audience, were now forever out of reach. I would have ended my life, so it was only my art that held me back, he confessed. So music, the very thing that had given him purpose and joy, now seemed like a cruel reminder of what he was losing. In the letter, there were moments of raw self-loathing. He berated himself for his weakness, for not being able to face the world with the same bravado as before. But amidst the despair, there were also glimmers of defiance. I will take fate by the throat, so it shall certainly never wholly overcome me. So he declared a foreshadowing of the resilience that would define his future. This testament wasn't just a cry for help. So it was a turning point. So a moment when Beethoven had to decide whether to succumb to his demons or rise above them and create some of the most groundbreaking music the world had ever heard. After the emotional turmoil of writing the Heiligenstadt Testament, Beethoven emerged not as a broken man, but as a musical rebel with a score to settle, like laugh, like on God, literally. His first major composition in the throes of deafness, the string quartet in F minor Op. 95, was a middle finger to his silent world and anyone who just dared to just count him out. So when the musicians first laid eyes on the sheet music, they might as well have been looking at hieroglyphics. The piece was filled with jagged, dissonant chords that seemed to just come out of nowhere. The tempo changes were so abrupt. It was like Beethoven was playing a cruel game of musical whiplash. One moment they'd be playing a gentle flowing melody, and the next they'd be thrown into like a storm of chaotic like note. The poor cellist, tasked with some of the most complex passages, probably just wanted to throw his instrument out the window. So in rehearsal after rehearsal, the quartet struggled to make sense of Beethoven's musical madness. They do look at each other, eyebrows raised silently, asking like, what on earth is he thinking? Laugh. Oh, but Beethoven, lost in his own auditory imagination, just gestured wildly, urging them on, oblivious to their confusion. This wasn't just like a piece of music. It was a manifestation of his anger, frustration, and determination. With every dissonant note, he was challenging the established rules of composition, defying the expectations of a music world that thought his best days were just behind him. The string quartet in F minor was Beethoven's way of saying, "Oh, I may be losing my hearing, but I am far from done making noise." And boy, did it make a noise laugh, like sort of like unca noise that would rattle the very foundations of classical music and set the stage for the revolutionary works that were yet to come. Picture this Beethoven, brimming with revolutionary spirit, penning his Symphony No. 3, originally titled Bonaparte. He saw Napoleon as the champion of liberty, like a figure who could reshape Europe and bring freedom to like the people. With feverish excitement, he poured his admiration into every note, crafting a kind of symphony that was so grand, powerful, and worthy of the man he considered a hero. But then news hit Vienna just like a thunderbolt. Napoleon had crowned himself emperor. The man who was supposed to be a liberator had succumbed to the allure of absolute power. Beethoven, upon hearing this, flew into a rage. His face reddened with anger, and his hands trembled with indignation. He grabbed the title page of the symphony, where, like Bonaparte, was written in elegant script, and with a fierce tug he just ripped it to shreds. Papers flew through the air. As he shouted curses, his deafness making his outburst even more unrestrained. He renamed the symphony Erika, a word that now carried a bitter irony, like the music, which was once a celebration, now became a complex exploration of heroism and betrayal. So, every time he sat down to work on the symphony after that, he did so with a newfound intensity. The notes seemed to burn with his disappointment, and yet there was also a determination to create something greater, so something that transcended his personal feelings for Napoleon. The Symphony No. 3, now known as the Erika, would go on to become one of his most famous works, a testament to both his musical genius and his fiery, passionate nature. As deafness tightened its grip on Beethoven, he refused to let it steal his music. Instead of surrendering, he became an inventor of sorts, coming up with some truly wild ways to hear, like the sounds that were slipping away from him. One of his most famous hacks, biting down on a rod attached to his piano. Pictured the scene: Beethoven, hair tousled and eyes so intense, sitting at his piano with a wooden rod clenched between his teeth. The other end of the rod is so pressed against the soundboard of the instrument. As he plays, the vibrations from the piano travel through the wood and into his jawbone, bypassing his failing ears and going straight to his inner ear. It just sounded a strange, almost primitive solution. But for Beethoven, it was just a lifeline. He also experimented with different kinds of ear trumpets, long cone-shaped devices that were supposed to amplify sound, but these didn't always work as well as he always hoped. Sometimes they made the sounds even more distorted, and other times they just weren't powerful enough to break through the wall of silence. So yeah, he did just toss them aside in frustration and go back to his trusty rod. Beethoven even tried to feel like the music in other ways. He'd lie on the floor next to the piano, pressing his hands and chest against the wooden casing, just trying to sense the vibrations coursing through the instrument. In his mind, he could still hear the music, and these physical sensations helped bridge the gap between his imagination and the real world. These odd makeshift methods might have seemed crazy to others, but for Beethoven, they were always the keys to unlocking a musical world that was slowly slipping away. Imagine just strolling through the beautiful countryside of Teplitz with two of the most renowned figures of the 19th century, Ludwig van Beethoven and Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. On paper, it's like a dream team, the musical genius and the literary titan enjoying a peaceful walk and exchanging profound thoughts. But then reality hit. As they re-chatting, a procession of the Austrian royal family approaches. Ever the diplomat and so conscious of social etiquette immediately bows deeply and steps to the side, eager to show respect. Beethoven, on the other hand, has a very different reaction. His face twists into a scowl, and he stands his ground, arms crossed so defiantly. The royal entourage passes by, and Goethe is mortified as he watches Beethoven's blatant disregard for protocol. He tries to subtly nudge Beethoven into showing some deference, but it's not just no use. Beethoven is lost in his own work, like his disdain for the aristocracy and their pompous ways overwhelming any sense of social decorum. So, after the royals have passed, Gus scolds like Beethoven, gently trying to explain the importance of maintaining appearances, but Beethoven just scoffs, launching into a passionate rant about how he refuses to bow down to people simply because of their birthright. The once pleasant walk has turned into an awkward standoff between two giants with very different views on society. This incident not only highlighted the stark contrast between the two men, but also showed Beethoven's unwavering commitment to his principles. So even if it meant causing a major social fox pairs, Beethoven's life took an unexpected and tumultuous turn when he became entangled in a legal battle for the guardianship of his nephew, Karl. This wasn't just a simple family matter. It was like a relentless emotional roller coaster that would just seep into every aspect of his life, including his music. Karl's father, Beethoven, as younger brother, passed away, leaving behind a mess of legal issues and a young son in need of care. Beethoven, convinced that he could provide a better life for Karl than the boy's mother, threw himself into the fight for guardianship. But the courts didn't make it so easy. There were just endless hearings, mountains of paperwork, and accusations flying from all sides. As the legal battle dragged on, Beethoven's stress levels skyrocketed. He poured his frustration, love, and anxiety into his compositions. The book, Missa Solemn Cider, a massive choral work, was being written during this kind of chaotic period. And if you listen closely, you can almost always hear the echoes of his struggle within the music. The soaring, powerful choruses might represent his hopes for Karl's future, while the more somber, dissonant passages could be a reflection of his fears and doubt. Karl, caught in the middle of this tug of war, was just a constant source of worry for Beethoven. The boy had his own rebellious streak, and his actions often left Beethoven heartbroken and angry. There were times when Karl ran away or got into trouble, and Beethoven would spend days searching for him, his mind consumed by worry. All of these emotional upheavals, the constant battles with the courts, and the strained relationship with Karl added a layer of complexity to Beethoven's so already tumultuous life, and so transformed his music into a deeply personal and emotional expression of his inner turmoil. The composition of String Quartet, Op. 13, Laugh, was nothing short of a musical nightmare for both Beethoven and the poor souls involved. This wasn't just a matter of jotting down a few notes. It was a never-ending cycle of creation, destruction, and reinvention that just seemed to have absolutely no end in sight. Beethoven became obsessed with perfecting every single bar of the quartet. He'd spend days poring over a single passage, scratching out notes with his quill, only to rewrite them, laugh, moments later. The manuscript paper was filled with a maze of crossings out, arrows pointing in every direction, and tiny scribbles in the margins so that even the most skilled musicologists have trouble deciphering. The musicians who were supposed to perform the piece were in for a really rough ride. They'd receive a whole new version of the score, only to find that the parts they'd painstakingly practiced, laugh, were now completely different. The cellist in particular was pushed to his limits. His part just kept evolving into something more and more complex, with sudden shifts in rhythm and pitch that seemed like designed to test the boundaries of human ability. Publishers, too, were at their wits' end. They begged Beethoven to finalize the work, promising deadlines and contracts, but he was unmoved. He was on a quest for musical perfection, and he didn't care if it drove everyone around him just crazy. The quartet's famous Den Grosse, huge laugh Emma movement, was originally intended as the finale, but Beethoven's ever-changing vision led to it being removed and published pretty separately. This constant tinkering and indecision made the creation of O.13 feel less like a musical process and more like a never-ending battle against his own exacting standard. As Beethoven's deafness progressed, something truly extraordinary happened. He developed a unique form of synesthesia, a sort of musical superpower that allowed him to see music in vivid colors. While the rest of the world heard silence, Beethoven's mind was like a riot of hues and shapes, each note on the page translating into a visual masterpiece. He described how a high-pitched violin melody might appear as a streak of bright glowing yellow shooting across his mental canvas. In contrast, the deep rumbling tones of the cello would manifest as a rich velvety purple, spreading slowly like ink on wet paper. These visualizations weren't just random associations, so they became an integral part of his creative process. When composing, Beethoven would close his eyes and let the colors guide him if a passage felt too flat. So he'd imagine adding splashes of contrasting colors to make it more vibrant, which translated into adding unexpected chords or changing the tempo. It was as if he was painting a symphony rather than just writing one. This synesthetic ability also helped him communicate his ideas to musicians instead of struggling to explain a complex musical concept verbally. So he might say, oh, this part needs to be a brighter red, more intense, and the musicians would somehow understand that he wanted a louder, more passionate performance. It was a strange, almost like otherworldly way of creating music, but for Beethoven, it was the key to unlocking a whole new level of creativity in the face of his growing deafness. It was a typical summer day in the Austrian countryside, but for Beethoven, it would become the stuff of legend. As he wandered along like a narrow dirt path, a sudden storm began to brew, dark clouds rolled in, and thunder rumbled in the distance. But instead of seeking shelter, Beethoven's eyes lit up with whatever excitement. The first raindrops fell, but he didn't care. He pulled out a small notebook and a stubby pencil from his pocket and started furiously scribbling. The sound of the rain hitting the leaves, just like the crack of thunder and the howling wind, weren't just noises to him, like they were musical inspiration. He could hear the rhythm of the storm, the harmony of the elements, and he was determined to capture it on paper. Beethoven ran through the muddy fields, his clothes getting soaked, and his hair plastered to his head. He didn't seem to notice the discomfort. So he was completely lost in the moment when lightning flashed. He'd pause as if struck by a new idea and then write even faster. This impromptu storm-chasing session would eventually give birth to some of the most iconic passages. So in his Symphony No. 6, asterisk, also known as Third Pastoral, the sounds of nature that he experienced that day, the babbling brook, the chirping of birds, and of course the powerful storm, were transformed into musical notes that would transport listeners to that very countryside for centuries to come. It was a really wild, almost frenzied moment of inspiration, a testament to Beethoven's ability to find beauty in music actually in the most unexpected places. Picture Beethoven stepping into a Viennese salon, where candlelight dances off gilded mirrors and aristocrats sip expensive wine. He's dressed in his best coat, but beneath the polished exterior, he's confronting a one-man show, the great deaf magician. As conversations flow around him, he's not listening, laugh, just like Juve break, he said, performing. His eyes dart from face to face, catching every twitch of a mouth, every raised eyebrow. Someone says, Mozart, and he nods enthusiastically, praying. He guessed the whole topic right. When the Countess laughs at a joke he didn't hear, he bursts into laughter like a beat too late, then covers it by taking a dramatic sip of punch. His hands gesture wildly to fill the gaps in his understanding, just as if his body language can compensate for his silent ear. Once a pianist starts playing his own sonata, and Beethoven stands next to the instrument, pretending to listen. Instead, he just feeling like the vibrations through the floorboards, his boot pressed against the piano cell leg. Ah! When the music stops, he sees the first to applaud, shouting, "Bravo!" so loudly that everyone turns to stare later. He'd still claim he was like moved by the passion, but the truth is, he just counted the pianist, said finger movements to know when the piece ended. These social charades were so exhausting. After hours of fake smiles and desperate lip reading, he'd stumble home, collapse on his piano bench, and pound out furious chords. The salon, Esai polite whispers, Unca, is he drunk? Oh yeah. Why does he shout? Yeah, laugh sort of just Unca would echo in his mind, but he got drown them out with music because in those quiet moments, alone with his piano, he didn't need to pretend he was just Beethoven, deaf as a post and twice as determined to make the world hear him. By the time Beethoven tackled his ninth symphony, he was a man gambling with fake laugh. Just like sort of like kind of then. Artistically, Vienna's aristocrats had stopped commissioning him. His bank account was emptier than a composer's coffee cup, and critics were calling his recent works unplayable noise. But instead of playing it safe, he decided to bet everything on a symphony that would include chorus, that. Yes, you heard that, right? Like a classical symphony with singing. It was unheard of, risky as heck, and exactly the kind of stunt Beethoven loved. He locked himself in a drafty apartment, surrounded by stacks of paper and half-eaten bread, and started like sketching the opening note. The problem, he couldn't hear his own ideas, so he built a like soundproof booth, read a room with mattresses nailed to the walls, and screamed the chore parts at the top of his lungs, feeling the vibrations in his chest. Laugh. Neighbors probably thought he was possessed, but maybe he was too busy inventing history to care. Financing the premiere was another headache. So he had to beg friends for loans, pawn his beloved grand piano, and even sell the copyright to his next piece in advance. The orchestra complained the music was too complex, so the choir couldn't hit the high notes, and everyone told him he was crazy to premiere such a mammoth work in his state. But Beethoven just waved them off, scrawling notes like louder, faster, more fire. So on the score, on premiere night, he stood at the front, back to the audience, waving his arms like a man possessed. The chorus sang Ode to Joy with such force that the hall just shook. And when final chord crashed down, laugh, Beethoven kept conducting, sort of like just oblivious to the standing ovation behind him. It wasn't just like a symphony. It was like a middle finger to deafness, poverty, and everyone who said he was past his prime. And as the audience wept and cheered, even the grumpiest critics had to admit this madman had just pulled off the greatest gamble in music history. The premiere of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony was a night of chaos, triumph, and probably one of the most heart-wrenching moments in music history as the final notes of Theo showed to Joy Wiki faded into the Vienna concert hall. The audience erupted into a thunderous standing ovation. People were just cheering, stomping their feet, and waving their hands, but like Beethoven, facing the orchestra with his back to the crowd, had no clue. He'd been conducting the entire symphony from memory, his body swaying to the rhythm so he could still feel in his bones. The vibrations of the bass drums thrummed through the podium, and like the piano side pedals sent tremors up his legs, but the applause was like a silent storm. A singer in the chorus, noticing his oblivion, gently tapped his shoulder and pointed toward the audience. When Beethoven turned around, the sight must have been overwhelming. Thousands of people were on their feet, their faces like a blur of emotion. His eyes widened, and his mouth fell open. For a moment, he just stood there, frozen, as if trying to process a reality that his ears couldn't confirm. Then he lifted his hand in a shaky bow. His face just a mix of confusion, gratitude, and maybe a hint of embarrassment. The image of Beethoven, deaf and disheveled, finally acknowledging the applause with a hesitant gesture, has become an icon of artistic perseverance. In that moment, the barrier between his silent world and the roaring audience really just dissolved. He might not have heard their cheers, but he just felt them like laugh, unclothed in the way the floor vibrated, in the intensity of their stares, and in the knowledge that he created something that transcended his own limitations. So it was a curtain call like no other, a poignant reminder that sometimes the most powerful messages are felt, not heard. Beethoven, late works were like a rebellious teenager smashing a porcelain tea set in like a stuffy drawing room. Classical rules like laugh, like uncut neat phrases, predictable harmonies, polite elegance, like uncut were tossed out the window like yesterday. Such sheet music, take the wed, diabelli variations like for example, what started as a simple waltz theme morphed into 33 variations that veered from furious fugues to ghostly minpios. Like someone like playing musical chairs with sanity. Music critics of the time were not amused. One wrote that his string quartet Op. 131 requires a physician rather than a musician to understand it, while another called his late piano sonatas the whole ravings of a sort of disturbed mind. They couldn't fathom why a deaf man was writing music that seemed designed to confuse listeners, but Beethoven wasn't too confused. So laugh, so UV break. Uncuth, he was liberated without the ability to hear how others performed his music. He wrote purely for his inner ear, where melodies could twist into knots and rhythms could stutter like a broken clock. In the gig Hammerclaw Hop Sonata, Din so früh, he stuck a massive fugue in the middle of a sonata, a move as shocking as serving pizza for dessert at a royal banquet. The fugue subject is so complex, it's said to mirror the chaos of his deafness, laugh like just unco, notes chasing each other in circles, never quite resolving, yet for all the dissonance, there are moments of breathtaking beauty, a sudden shift to a major key that feels like sunlight breaking through storm clouds, or a piano passage so delicate, like it sounds as if he est whispering to himself in the silence. These works weren't just like musical compositions, they were like a manifesto. Beethoven was proving that even in laugh, total deafness, art could thrive, and that rules were made to be shattered. Today, like those crazy late pieces are revered as some of the most profound in classical music laugh, but in their time, they were like a musical middle finger to convention. And so really, what else would you expect from a guy who once ripped up a symphony dedicated to a dictator? Beethoven's manuscripts are like crime scene photos of a musical revolution, laugh like just uncut splattered with ink blot scratch marks and secret codes only he could decipher. Take the score for his Ninth Symphony. Stuart set a battlefield of crossed-out notes, arrows pointing to nowhere, and tiny annotations in the margins that look like chicken scratch. In one passage, he wrote furiosissimo, laugh, a word he invented to describe a tempo faster than furious, because normal words couldn't contain his musical rate. The book Missa Solemnis, Dietzsch's manuscript is even wilder. He drew little lightning bolts next to climactic chords as if warning performers that the music might just electrocute them. In the Donna Nobis Pacem section, his handwriting becomes so frantic, the notes blur into a black storm on the page, laugh improbably because he was composing it during a violent thunderstorm. So yes, he did that on purpose. Musicologists have spent decades decoding these manuscripts only to find more mysteries. Why did he write the same melody 3 different ways on the same page? Was that smudge from an angry ink toss, or did he just spill his coffee in the book Hammerklavier Sonata? Laughbarter lecture draft there as a page where he drew a stick figure kicking a piano with the whole caption, "This whole damn instrument just uncouth that even musical geniuses have temper tantrums." But these messy manuscripts hold the key to his creative process. Each scratch isn't a mistake, it's a battle scar. He'd write a phrase, hate it, rewrite it, hate it again, until the paper was so thin from erasing. You could just see so through it. It's like watching a boxer go like 15 rounds with his own ideas. Except instead of gloves, he used a quill, and instead of a ring, he had like a drafty Vienna apartment. And when you hear the polished final works, remember, every perfect note was born from 100 flawed ones, scribbled out in ink and frustration. Beethoven's doctors must have graduated from the school of medieval torture techniques. When his deafness worsened, they didn't reach for hearing aids. So on cat they grabbed leeches, enemas, and just enough herbal potions to stalk a witch. Cell's Pantry 1. So genius physician suggested stuffing his ears with cotton soaked in brandy, which probably made him feel drunk but did zills for his hearing. The leech therapy was a real crowd pleaser. Dozens of slimy critters were slapped onto his neck and ears, supposed to like draw out the bad blood. Beethoven, already grumpy from deafness, now had to lie still while worms sucked his blood. No wonder he once wrote in a letter. Then there were the enemas. Oh, the enemas. His physician prescribed regular coffee enemas. Yeah, yes, you read that, right? To like cleanse the body. Imagine being Beethoven deaf, struggling to compose, and now forced to lie on your stomach while someone administers laugh. Uncle, well, let's like just say it's a miracle he didn't throw his doctor out the window. One particularly adventurous doc suggested a whole steam bath treatment. Beethoven was sealed in a wooden box with only his head sticking out while scalding steam was pumped inside. The goal to like open the pores and let the deafness escape. Instead, he probably came out looking like a boiled lobster, minus any hearing improvement. These quack remedies weren't just painful laugh, like just unky, they were dangerous. The constant bloodletting weakened him, and the harsh chemicals in the potions probably messed with his stomach. But what choice did he have? Modern medicine was still in its infancy, and deafness was a mystery. So he endured the leeches, the enemas, the steam boxes, all while muttering curses in German. Next time you complain about a boring doctor, visit. Remember, at least they aren't just like trying to cure your headache with a brandy-soaked cotton ball. In the stormy spring of 1827, Vienna was gripped by a series of violent thunderstorms. Like Beethoven, lying weak and feverish in his bed, just seemed to draw strength from the chaos outside. On the 26th of March, as a particularly fierce tempest raged, his servant noticed the composer suddenly raise his right fist into the air, as if just shaking it at the heaven. It was a fitting final gesture from a man who actually spent his life defying fate. The thunder crashed, the windows rattled, and like Beethoven, perhaps hearing one last symphony in his mind, held that fist aloft for a moment before collapsing back onto the pillow. Some say his last words were pay pity laugh, sort of uncooked too late phone you had. No one knows for sure. Maybe he was thinking of unfinished music, or the nephew who caused him so much grief, or simply the life he lived in defiance of silence. The storm didn't let up. As his friends gathered around the bed, a bolt of lightning struck nearby, followed by a deafening clap of thunder. And in that instant, Ludwig van Beethoven, the man who wrestled with deafness for half his whole life, finally fell like silent. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The composer who battled to hear ended his days in a storm of sound. His last act like a defiant shake at the sky that had just stolen his hearing. When the autopsy came, doctors found his ears riddled with deformities. Laugh. Just unca. No surprise there. But what they couldn't explain was how in total deafness, he created music that seemed to always hear the human soul. Maybe the thunder was his final applause, a natural symphony to send him off, or maybe in that last moment, the heavens finally gave him back the sound like he'd lost. Either way, it's a hell of a story for a guy who once wrote a symphony that just made people cry. Decades after Beethoven's death, curious minds exhumed his body to solve the mystery of his deafness. In 1863, anatomists carefully examined his remains, expecting to find a simple cause. What they discovered was a mess of medical oddities. Laugh. So uncut, like a detective finding too many clues at a crime scene. His inner ears were deformed with shrunken auditory nerves and strange bony growths. One doctor noted to pour chalky substance weak, clogging the canals, just like someone had poured cement into his hearing apparatus. But that wasn't until his jawbone showed signs of old infections, and his skull had tiny lesions that might have been from syphilis, a rumor that's never been proven. But hey, 19th century Vienna was just like a wild place. Modern scientists took it a step further in 2014, analyzing DNA from his hair. They found mutations linked to inner ear damage and even kidney disease, which might explain why his doctors, like weird remedies, looking at you coffee animus, never worked. Laugh. So Auntie was fighting multiple biological battles. One theory suggests he had a rare genetic disorder that made his ears self-destruct over time. But here said the kicker. None of these physical defects fully explain how he kept composing. Most deaf composers lose their musical imagination, but like Beethoven's inner ear must have been a pretty rebel. Maybe those deformed nerves created a kind of feedback loop, letting him daily hear daily music in his brain more vividly, or maybe as some researchers suggest, his deafness forced him to think in pure vibrations, translating rhythms into physical sensations so that ordinary listeners can only imagine. In the end, the autopsy gave us bones and theories, but no easy answers.
So Beethoven's deafness was a puzzle wrapped in a riddle inside a musical genius.
And maybe that's how he wanted laugh. So it's sort of like, after all, the man who wrote symphonies that made people cry probably didn't want his life story tied up in a neat medical report. He was chaos, he was defiance, and now he sends a scientific enigma too. Beethoven's deafness wasn't just a tragedy, sort of like laugh, like just it was a spark that ignited musical revolution. Walk into any concert hall today, and his Ninth Symphony still makes people weep, while his late quartets leave audiences stunned into silence. How did a deaf man set's music become so universal? Maybe because he turned his disability into a superpower. When he couldn't hear applause, he learned to feel it in his bones. Laugh, so his music thumps with rhythms that vibrate through floors. When he lost the ability to chat with musicians, he wrote scores so detailed they were like love letters to future performers. Oh, here, feel this explosion of joy, or yeah, now tiptoe like a ghost. Even his famous shortcomings, laugh, like the sudden silences, the jarring chord changes, like the ka became his signature, like a rebel scrawling graffiti on classical music as pristine wall. Modern composers like Philip Glass admit they steal his tricks, the way he repeats a melody until it becomes an obsession, or how he builds tension like a storm gathering strength. Deaf artists today point to him as proof that silence isn't to avoid laugh, just uncut as a canvas. When singer-songwriter Chris Martin of Coldplay visited Beethoven's home, he touched the piano where the master once bit a rod to feel vibrations, saying, "Oh, you realize music isn't just heard, it's experienced." In Vienna, the the Beethoven house displays his ear trumpets and tattered manuscripts, but the real magic isn't tied in the artifacts left, so sort of like uncat, it's sat in the fact that his music still rocks stages from Tokyo to Rio. He proved that art isn't bound by ears or rules or even sanity. So the next time you hear an orchestra blast into his Fifth Symphony, remember those four notes, like a jiffle, like I da 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 dum G demo. Were born in a mind that couldn't hear them, but refused to stay quiet. That's the real legacy. When the world tries to silence you, yell back with everything you've. As we look back on Beethoven's journey, it's really clear that his story isn't just a historical anecdote laugh, just unquoted, set a timeless testament to the indomitable human spirit. His battles with deafness, social scorn, and personal turmoil were not obstacles that crushed him, but rather catalysts that fueled his whole creative fire. In the quietude of his silent world, he crafted symphonies that would resonate through the ages, bridging gaps of time like culture and language. Today, his music continues to find new life in unexpected places, from being sampled in modern pop songs to filling the halls of schools and hospitals. Beethoven's work has a way of speaking to the soul. Whether you like Reventi, seasoned classical music lover, or someone like hearing his melodies for the first time. So, his story reminds us that our greatest challenges can become our greatest inspirations, and that true genius isn't measured by perfection, but by the courage to create in the face of adversity. As long as there are those who dare to dream and fight against the odds, the spirit of Beethoven will live on like a guiding light for all who seek to leave their mark on the world.